Well, hello and happy St. Patrick's Day. Really, it's kind of a sad St. Patrick's Day because, we're all in this self-imposed or government-imposed isolation. And it means that many of us are missing out on some of the St. Patrick's Day festivities that are going on throughout the country. Anyway, I saw this as an opportunity. I saw this as an opportunity to talk about the real St. Patrick. The St. Patrick who's very familiar with isolation himself. In fact, it was during his isolation that he experienced the greatest spiritual transformation of his life. When it comes to St. Patrick, there's a lot of myths and a lot of legends associated with him. One of the biggest myths is that he was an Irishman. And the reality is that he didn't step foot on Ireland until he was in his teens. In fact, it was at the age of 16 that he was kidnapped by a group of Irish raiders who drug him away from his homeland and forced him to live as a shepherd on the northern and rough mountains of Northern Ireland. But it was during that time where he was able to spend time reflecting really on his home, not only his home but his Christian roots. And again, it was during that time that he experienced some really great spiritual transformation. You see, because up until that time, he was kind of a marginal Christian at best. But having day after day after day to be able to reflect on his life, on God and his relationship with God, it began to change him from the inside out, began to form him. And obviously he spent many, many nights, many days in prayer, and especially praying that someday he would be able to return back to his homeland. And his prayer was answered, but it was not without trial. You see, he had to travel by foot about 200 miles back to the coast where he actually was able to stow away on a ship that was traveling back to his homeland. Anyway, when we got back home, his family was very excited to see him, but they knew that there was something different about him, that ordeal had changed him. And St. Patrick, he was convinced that ordeal was not without purpose. In fact, he believed there was a divine purpose to his ordeal. And we'd soon find that to be true. While he was studying to be a priest, he experienced a series of strange dreams. He would dream about Irish people, the very Irish people who kidnapped him. He would dream about them calling him back to return to Ireland. And so one day, he did return, but he didn't return as a slave. No, he returned as a missionary. He spent 30 years in Ireland, traveling around the countryside, experienced all sorts of ordeal. But during that period, it was very fruitful. It was a very fruitful period in his life because he was able to plant over 700 churches and monasteries. He was able to ordain hundreds of priests. And he was also able to baptize himself over 100,000 converts. Anyway, there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the life of St. Patrick. But I think one of the lessons that we can learn in our time today is really that when it comes to isolation, isolation from people is not the same as separation from God. Again, let me state it again, that isolation from people doesn't equate to separation from God. As we saw, we learned in the story of St. Patrick, it was during this time of isolation from people that he became closest to God. That he experienced great spiritual transformation, a spiritual transformation that would become the catalyst for God's working in his life. And as we experience this isolation during this COVID-19 virus, this too can be an opportunity for us to experience a little bit of spiritual transformation ourselves. I don't think it's a coincidence that this COVID-19 virus happened right in the early part of Lent, one of the most holy seasons of the Christian year. Because Lent, again, is not only about fish fries, but it's meant to be a period of isolation, really a period of solitude, where you spend time examining yourself, examining God and your relationship to Him, and to be able to take steps that would move you closer to Him. Anyway, as I thought about, what can I do to help people in this particular crisis? What can I do from my home? And it came to me that, I can do a number of things. I could go out and serve meals. I can deliver groceries to the elderly. Those are all good things, but the reality is those things are getting done for the most part right now. What I thought would be the most valuable would be to take my spiritual gifts, my teaching gifts, my education, my years as a pastor, even my experience as a coach, and to use it as an opportunity to teach people. Really to teach people about an area or topic that I'm very passionate about, the spiritual disciplines. Again, you may not be familiar with the term spiritual discipline, but it really just is another fancy way of saying or referring to the spiritual practice such as prayer or Bible study, practices that most of us are familiar with, but also, again, the practices that we may not be totally familiar with, like fasting or meditation or the spiritual discipline of noticing God throughout your day. Anyway, so I thought what I'd do is I'd use this time, I'd use this technology just as an opportunity to teach people about the spiritual disciplines. And not only to teach people about the spiritual disciplines, but encourage them to apply them during this particular season of life. And so when we all leave here, which we will someday soon, we will again not just jump back into the mode of doing, going out there and being busy, the mode of doing things. But we will leave here in a new mode, a mode that where we are being more like Jesus Christ, so that we may be fully equipped to go out into the world and to serve God and also to serve others and to prepare ourselves to be spiritually equipped for the many different challenges that are surely to come our way. Anyway, have a happy St. Patrick's Day, and I look forward to teaching you some information very soon. Good night.